Montana Territory, 1870. The small graveyard outside Whiteridge sat abandoned but for a solitary figure among the weathered crosses and stone markers. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dry earth as Nathan Vance dismounted his chestnut quarter horse. He removed his hat, running a hand through his sunlightened brown hair as he watched the young woman kneeling before a barren grave, a simple wooden cross with no name, no dates, no words at all. Nathan believed the frontier demanded a certain hardness of spirit. At 25, he'd already seen enough death and disappointment to convince him that the West was no place for sentimentality. Love was a luxury for people back east with sturdy homes and the protection of civilization. Out here, attachment only led to heartbreak. The land was too harsh, life too uncertain, and the only reliable companion was solitude. He'd come to Whiteridge to deliver cattle and planned to move on within the week. That was his way, never staying long enough to form connections, avoiding the complications that came with being known. It was safer that way. But something about the lone figure in the cemetery caught his attention, like a painting he couldn't look away from. She wore a modest blue dress, her honey blonde hair partially secured in a simple arrangement while the rest fell in waves down her back. In her small hands she clutched wildflowers, mountain lupin and Indian paintbrush, arranging them carefully at the base of the unmarked cross. Nathan had intended to pass by. The grief of strangers wasn't his concern. Yet he found himself approaching, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Pardon me, miss," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "I couldn't help but notice. Who are you mourning at a grave with no writing?" She turned, and Nathan felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. Her face was delicate, with high cheekbones and full lips, but it was her eyes that struck him, gray-blue like the sky before a storm and equally turbulent with emotion. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old. "I'm sorry to intrude," Nathan added quickly. "It's not my place." The young woman considered him for a moment before answering. "It's all right, I suppose it does look strange." She touched the petals of a lupin with gentle fingertips. "I don't know who rests here, that's why I come." "I don't understand." She stood, brushing the dirt from her skirt. "My name is Beatrice Lawson, though most call me B, and you are?" "Nathan Vance. Just passing through with a cattle drive." "Well, Mr. Vance, I bring flowers to this grave because whoever lies here has no one else to remember them. No name to be spoken, no story to be told." A soft breeze lifted strands of her hair. "Everyone deserves to be remembered, don't you think?" The question unsettled him. In his years of drifting, Nathan had witnessed countless unmarked graves, victims of disease, violence, or simple misfortune, left to the mercy of strangers for burial. He'd never given much thought to what came after. "I suppose," he answered, uncertain. "You don't sound convinced." There was no accusation in her voice, only curiosity. "The West claims many. Can't mourn them all." Beatrice looked back at the grave. "I'm not mourning exactly, just acknowledging there's a difference." She gathered her shawl around her shoulders as the wind picked up. "Will you be in Whiteridge long, Mr. Vance?" "Few days. Getting supplies before moving the herd north." "Then perhaps I'll see you around town." She offered a small smile that somehow reached her eyes. "Good day." Nathan watched her walk away, slender figure growing smaller against the backdrop of the distant mountains. He placed his hat back on his head, troubled by their brief exchange. He'd learned long ago not to ask questions that invited complications. Yet here he was, wondering about Beatrice Lawson and her strange devotion to a nameless grave. 2 days later, Nathan spotted Beatrice again, this time emerging from the general store with a basket of supplies. Without intending to, he found himself crossing the dusty street toward her. "Miss Lawson," he called, removing his hat. She turned, recognition brightening her face. "Mr. Vance, still in town, I see." Till tomorrow, herds rested enough. He fell into step beside her, offering to carry her basket. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. How long have you been bringing flowers to that grave?" Beatrice glanced at him as though measuring his sincerity. "Since I arrived in Whiteridge last spring. I was passing through the cemetery and noticed it, so plain among the others. The caretaker told me a stranger had been buried there some years ago. No identification, no one to claim the body." "And that bothered you? Wouldn't it bother you?" "To think of dying alone, unremembered." She stopped walking. "I lost my parents young, the thought of being forgotten, it haunts me." Nathan nodded slowly. He understood loss, though he'd trained himself not to dwell on it. His parents were long gone, his childhood home abandoned to prairie fires years ago. He'd learned that the less you had, the less you could lose. "It's kind of you," he said finally. "But unusual." "I'm often told I'm unusual," she replied with a hint of amusement. "Are you always so questioning of strangers' habits, Mr. Vance?" "Only the interesting ones." The words slipped out before he could stop them. A flush of color touched her cheeks. "And where will you and your cattle be heading after Whiteridge?" "North to Fort Benton, got a buyer there." Nathan surprised himself by adding, "Though I'm not in any particular hurry." Beatrice smiled. "Then perhaps you'd join me for supper this evening." "I work at the boarding house, Mrs. Fletcher's place. We feed the guests at 6. The invitation should have triggered Nathan's instinct to retreat. Sharing a meal meant conversation, and conversation led to attachments he couldn't afford. Yet he found himself accepting, "I'd be honored, Miss Lawson." That evening, Nathan arrived at the boarding house, having traded his trail-worn clothes for his only decent shirt and trousers. The main dining room hummed with conversation as Mrs. Fletcher, a plump widow with a perpetually flushed face, led him to a small table in the corner. "Bea said you'd be joining us," she said with a knowing look that made Nathan uncomfortable. "She's just finishing up in the kitchen." The meal was simple but well prepared: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Nathan had grown accustomed to trail food, beans, and salt pork, and the home-cooked meal seemed like luxury. Beatrice joined him partway through, her cheeks pink from the kitchen heat, her hair now fully pinned up in a practical style. "I hope everything is to your liking," she said, taking the seat across from him. "Best meal I've had in months." As they ate, Beatrice told him about her journey to Montana Territory after her aunt, her last living relative, had passed away in Pennsylvania. She'd come west with nothing but determination and the modest skills of reading, writing, and sewing. "Mrs. Fletcher took me in," she explained, "gave me work, a room upstairs. She's been like family to me." "You're young to be so far from home alone," Nathan observed. "I'm 22, hardly a child, and what of you? You seem to prefer being alone." Nathan paused, fork midway to his mouth. "It's simpler that way." "Simpler perhaps, but lonelier too, I'd imagine." Her directness caught him off guard. Most people didn't question his solitary nature. The trail isn't conducive to companionship. "I don't believe that," Beatrice said, her eyes holding his. "People find ways to connect, even in difficult circumstances, perhaps especially then." Nathan set down his fork, suddenly aware of how close their hands were on the table. "You have a unique way of seeing things, Miss Lawson." "Babe plays." "Bea," he repeated, the name feeling intimate on his tongue. After supper they sat on the boarding house porch, watching as the town settled into evening. A dog barked in the distance, and lamplight glowed in windows along the main street. Despite his plans to leave the next morning, Nathan found himself telling Beatrice about his life, his childhood in Missouri, losing his family farm during the war, his years working cattle drives across increasingly remote territories. "I've never stayed anywhere longer than a season," he admitted, "always something pushing me onward." "Or something you're running from?" she asked gently. Nathan stared into the gathering darkness. "Maybe both." "Will you come to the cemetery with me tomorrow before you leave?" Beatrice asked, changing the subject. "I'd like to introduce you properly to my nameless friend." The request was strange, but Nathan couldn't refuse her. "If you'd like." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Nathan delayed the cattle drive's departure, telling his men he had business to attend to in town. They exchanged knowing glances but asked no questions. He met Beatrice at the cemetery gates where she waited with a fresh bouquet of wildflowers. They walked together to the unmarked grave. In the morning light it looked even more forlorn, a simple wooden cross weathering away with each passing season. "I wonder about them sometimes," Beatrice said as she knelt to remove the wilted flowers from her previous visit. Was it a man or woman, young or old? Did they have family somewhere who never knew what became of them? She arranged the fresh flowers carefully. "Everyone has a story, Nathan, even those whose names we'll never know." Nathan watched her hands, gentle and sure in their task. "How do you bear it, all the sadness in the world?" She looked up at him, her expression softening. "By remembering there's beauty too. By choosing to care even when it would be easier not to." She stood, facing him. "That's why you're leaving today, isn't it? Because caring is risky." Her insight struck too close to truth. "I have obligations," he said stiffly. Cattle to deliver. Of course, she took a step back, disappointment visible in the set of her shoulders. Safe travels, then. Nathan knew he should thank her and walk away. Head north with his herd and forget the woman who brought flowers to strangers' graves, yet something kept him rooted to the spot. What if I came back? The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. After Fort Benton. I could pass through Whiteridge again. Hope flickered across Beatrice's face. I'd like that. I can't promise when. I understand, the trail dictates its own time. She reached out, touching his arm briefly. I'll be here. The cattle drive to Fort Benton took longer than expected. Summer storms slowed their progress, turning trails to mud and swelling creek crossings. By the time Nathan delivered the herd and collected payment, autumn was approaching. He found himself thinking of Beatrice often, her quiet strength, her compassion for the forgotten. It unsettled him how frequently she entered his mind. On the return journey, Nathan encountered a wagon train of settlers headed for Oregon. Among them was a family with 5 young children, their mother recently deceased from fever. The father, overwhelmed with grief and the responsibility of the journey ahead, asked Nathan if he knew of any town where the children might find temporary refuge until he could establish a homestead and return for them. In that moment, Nathan thought of Whiteridge, of Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, of Beatrice. I know just the place, he told the man. Nathan arrived in Whiteridge with the 5 Thompson children, ranging from 4 to 12 years old, trailing behind him like ducklings. He led them straight to the boarding house where Mrs. Fletcher's initial shock quickly gave way to practical arrangements. We have room enough, she declared, assessing the tired, dusty children, though it'll be a tight fit. Nathan explained the situation while the children were being fed in the kitchen. Their father will return for them once he's built a home. He's left funds for their care. Mrs. Fletcher nodded, but her expression remained dubious. Many such promises go unfulfilled in the West, Mr. Vance. Surely you know that. I gave him my word I'd look after them until he returns, Nathan said firmly. And how long will you be staying this time? Asked a familiar voice. Nathan turned to find Beatrice in the doorway, her expression unreadable. 3 months had passed since he'd seen her, but she was just as he remembered, perhaps a bit thinner, her eyes more guarded. I'm not certain, he admitted. I need to find work locally for a while. Beatrice exchanged a glance with Mrs. Fletcher before addressing him again. The sawmill is hiring, and the Thompson ranch lost 2 hands to gold fever last month. Thank you. I'll inquire tomorrow, Nathan hesitated. It's good to see you, Bea. Her expression softened slightly. The children will need proper beds. I'll help prepare rooms. As Beatrice walked away, Mrs. Fletcher gave Nathan a measuring look. That girl waited for you to return, you know. Never said as much, but I could tell. Don't disappoint her again if you're just passing through. Nathan secured work at the Thompson Ranch, which offered a small cabin as part of his wages. The position allowed him to remain in Whiteridge while still giving him the space he was accustomed to. Each day he rode into town to check on the children, gradually becoming a fixture in their lives, helping with schoolwork, teaching the boys to fish, ensuring the girls had proper winter boots as the season changed. Beatrice, too, had taken the children under her wing, especially 4-year-old Emma, who followed her everywhere. Nathan often found himself at the boarding house in the evenings, ostensibly to visit the children, but increasingly drawn to Beatrice's company. One crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching Emma and 6-year-old Samuel play with a kitten, Beatrice broke the comfortable silence between them. You've surprised me, Nathan Vance. How so? You speak of preferring solitude, yet here you are, practically raising 5 children who aren't your own. Nathan watched the children laughing. They needed help, I was there. It's more than that, Beatrice turned to face him. You care about them, you've made a place for yourself in their lives. He couldn't deny it. The Thompson children had somehow slipped past his defenses, their needs more important than his habits of isolation. And if he was honest with himself, so had Beatrice. Maybe I'm changing my mind about some things, he admitted. She smiled, a genuine warmth that reached her eyes. Come to the cemetery with me tomorrow. I've been telling my nameless friend about you. The following day, they walked together to the unmarked grave, now adorned with autumn leaves and late-blooming asters. Nathan noticed that the cross had been repaired, the wood freshly sealed against the coming winter. Did you fix it? He asked. Beatrice nodded. Mr. Gunderson at the funeral parlor helped me. Said it was the least he could do. Nathan felt a surge of admiration for her persistence in honoring this unknown person. Has anyone ever told you you're remarkable? Not recently, she said with a small smile. Then more seriously, Nathan, there's something I should tell you. About why this grave means so much to me. Before she could continue, they heard hoofbeats approaching. A rider appeared at the cemetery entrance, the town's deputy looking grim. Vance, been looking for you, he called. Got a telegram from Fort Benton, man named Jasper Thompson, says he's coming for his kids next week. Nathan felt a conflicting rush of emotions, gladness that the father had kept his word, sadness at the thought of the children leaving. That's good news, I'll tell them. The deputy hesitated. There's more, says he's bringing his new wife. Beatrice gasped softly beside him. Those poor children, they don't even know. I'll tell them tonight, Nathan said. They should have time to prepare themselves. After the deputy left, Beatrice took Nathan's arm as they walked back toward town. The children have grown so attached to you, to all of us. They'll adapt. Children are resilient. And what about you, she asked. Will you leave once they're gone? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Nathan had been asking himself the same thing for weeks. Without the children as an anchor, what reason did he have to stay in Whiteridge? He looked at Beatrice, her face turned toward him with an openness that made his chest ache. I don't know, he answered honestly. The day Jasper Thompson arrived with his new bride, a practical-looking woman named Martha, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. The children greeted their father with a mixture of joy and apprehension, eyeing their stepmother with undisguised wariness. Nathan stood back watching the reunion with mixed feelings. He'd grown to love these children in the months they'd been in his care. Letting them go felt like losing a part of himself he hadn't known was there. Jasper approached Nathan, extending his hand. I can't thank you enough for looking after them. Martha and I have a good place in Oregon, fertile land close to a school. They're good children, Nathan said. Smart too, little Emma's already learning her letters. Jasper nodded, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Martha's sister runs a dress shop in Portland, needs an assistant. I thought perhaps Miss Lawson might be interested in the position. Martha mentioned it might be good to have someone the children already know to help with the transition. Nathan felt the ground shift beneath him. Beatrice. You're asking her to go with you. We'd provide room and board, of course, and a small salary. Jasper looked over to where Beatrice was helping Martha with the children's belongings. She seems fond of them. And they clearly adore her. Nathan couldn't find words to respond. The thought of Beatrice leaving Whiteridge, leaving him, created a hollow feeling he couldn't name. That evening, after the Thompson family had settled into rooms at the hotel for their 2-day stay before departing, Nathan found Beatrice at the cemetery. Twilight was falling, casting long shadows across the graves. She knelt at the unmarked cross, not with flowers this time, but with a small oil lamp that cast a warm glow in the gathering darkness. I thought I might find you here, he said quietly. She didn't turn. Jasper Thompson offered me a position in Oregon. I know, he told me. The children would benefit from a familiar face. Nathan moved closer, standing beside her. And what about you? Would Oregon benefit you? Beatrice sighed, rising to her feet. Perhaps it's a chance at something new, a family of sorts. They're not your family, B. No, she agreed, meeting his eyes. But what is my alternative? To stay here, continuing as I have been. I care for those children, Nathan, and they need me. The pain in her voice made him reach for her hand. What about what you need? What I need, she laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. What I need has never factored into my decisions. Survival rarely allows for such luxury. Tell me what you need, he pressed, please. Beatrice looked away toward the darkening horizon. I need to matter to someone, to be more than just passing through their life. Her voice broke slightly. I need to not be forgotten. Understanding dawned on Nathan like a physical blow. The unmarked grave, her fear of being forgotten, the way she'd waited for his return when anyone else would have given up. Is that why this place means so much to you? He asked, gesturing to the grave. Because you fear the same fate. My parents died of fever when I was 16, she said softly. By the time I buried them, I was too weak from illness myself to mark their graves properly. When I recovered, I couldn't find them among the dozens of new graves from the epidemic. My own parents, and I don't know where they rest. Tears shimmered in her eyes. No one should be forgotten that way. Nathan pulled her gently into his arms, feeling her tears dampen his shirt. You won't be forgotten, Beatrice. Not while I'm alive. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. But you'll leave eventually, that's what you do. The truth of her words stung, but he couldn't deny them. His entire adult life had been spent in motion, avoiding connections, choosing solitude over risk. What if I didn't? The question surprised him as much as it did her. What if I stayed? Why would you do that? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Nathan took a breath, summoning courage he didn't know he possessed. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, irrevocable. Beatrice stared at him, her expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and fear. You can't mean that, she said finally. You hardly know me. I know enough, he insisted. I know you bring flowers to nameless graves because you believe everyone deserves to be remembered. I know you took in 5 strange children without hesitation because they needed care. I know your laugh makes me feel like I've come home for the first time in my life. He took her hands in his. And I know that the thought of you leaving with the Thompsons makes me realize what a fool I've been, thinking I was better off alone. Beatrice searched his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty. And if I stay, what then? Then we find out together what it means to build something lasting. Nathan glanced at the unmarked grave beside them. No one should face this world alone, forgotten. Not them, not you. Not me. She touched his face gently. You're asking me to believe you'll stay when everything in your past says otherwise. I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove it. He covered her hand with his own. Stay, Bea. Stay with me. In the dim light of the oil lamp, her eyes glistened with tears and something that looked like hope. I want to believe you. Then believe this. Nathan knelt before her, still holding her hand. Beatrice Lawson, I've spent my life running from attachments because I feared losing what I loved. But I've learned that the greater loss is never loving at all. Will you marry me and help me build a life here? A real home. For a moment Beatrice stood perfectly still, and Nathan feared he'd asked too much too soon. Then she sank to her knees before him, bringing them face to face. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking. Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you. Nathan drew her close, kissing her with all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Beatrice looked over at the nameless grave. We should tell our friend, she said with a small smile. I think they know, Nathan replied. Maybe they've been watching over you all along. The next morning, Nathan and Beatrice went together to speak with Jasper and Martha Thompson. They explained their engagement and Beatrice's decision to remain in Whiteridge, but offered to help the children write letters to maintain their connection. I'm happy for you both, Jasper said, looking between them with genuine warmth. The children will miss you, but knowing you found happiness here will ease their minds. Before the Thompson family departed 2 days later, Nathan took 12-year-old Robert aside for a man-to-man talk. You're the oldest, he told the boy. Your father will rely on you to help with your brothers and sisters. Robert nodded solemnly. I know I can do it. I believe you can. Nathan handed him a small pocket knife. This was given to me by my father when I was about your age. I want you to have it. The boy's eyes widened as he accepted the gift. Thank you, Mr. Vance. I'll take good care of it. And take good care of your family, Nathan added, surprised by the tightness in his throat. Write to Miss Lawson and me when you're settled. I will, Robert hesitated, then threw his arms around Nathan in a quick, fierce hug. I won't forget you. As the wagon carrying the Thompson family rolled out of Whiteridge, Nathan stood with his arm around Beatrice, feeling a bittersweet mixture of loss and anticipation. They'll be all right, Beatrice said, leaning against him. Yes, they will, Nathan kissed the top of her head, and so will we. In the weeks that followed, Nathan purchased a small parcel of land outside town with the savings from his cattle drives. It wasn't much, a few acres with an aging cabin that needed considerable work, but it was theirs. Together, they repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, and added a small porch where they could watch the sunset over the mountains. Word spread quickly about their engagement. Mrs. Fletcher insisted on hosting the wedding at the boarding house, and the townspeople of Whiteridge, who had come to respect Nathan during his months with the Thompson children, offered help and wedding gifts. 2 months after the Thompson family's departure, on a clear December morning with the first dusting of snow on the ground, Nathan Vance and Beatrice Lawson were married in the parlor of Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. Beatrice wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar that she'd sewn herself, and carried a bouquet of evergreen sprigs and dried wildflowers preserved from summer. After the ceremony, while the guests enjoyed the wedding feast, Nathan took Beatrice's hand and led her outside. "Where are we going?" she asked, gathering her shawl against the winter chill. "There's something I want to show you before we leave for our home." They walked to the cemetery, now quiet under its blanket of snow. Nathan guided her to the unmarked grave where she gasped at what stood there. The weathered wooden cross had been replaced with a proper stone marker. Engraved upon it were the words, "Known only to God. RMBRD by those who came after. Not forgotten." Beatrice turned to him, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Nathan, how did you?" "Mr. Gunderson helped me arrange it." "He knows a stonecutter in Helena." Nathan brushed a snowflake from her cheek. "No one should be forgotten, B. You taught me that." She kissed him, her lips warm despite the cold. "Thank you." They stood together at the grave for a moment longer, then turned toward town, toward their waiting friends and the beginning of their life together. "You know," Nathan said as they walked arm in arm through the snow, "for someone who spent years believing the frontier was no place for love, I seem to have found it anyway." Beatrice smiled up at him, her face glowing with happiness. "Perhaps the frontier is exactly where love matters most. Where else do we need to be remembered so desperately?" "I'll remember you, Beatrice Vance," he promised, "every day for the rest of my life." "And I'll remember you," she replied. "The cowboy who saw me place flowers on a grave with no writing and asked who I lost." She squeezed his hand. "Little did I know what I would find instead." Spring came to Whiteridge in a rush of greening grass and wildflowers dotting the hills. Nathan and Beatrice's small homestead flourished under their care. They'd added chickens and 2 milk cows, and Nathan had broken ground for a vegetable garden that Beatrice tended daily. Letters arrived from the Thompson children, full of news about their new life in Oregon. Beatrice read them aloud in the evenings as she and Nathan sat on their porch, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. "Robert says Martha is expecting a baby in the fall," she announced one evening, looking up from the letter. "The children seem to be adjusting well." Nathan smiled, reaching over to take her hand. "I'm glad. They deserve happiness." "As do we all." Beatrice set the letter aside, her expression turning thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said when you proposed, about building something lasting." "And?" She placed his hand gently on her abdomen, her eyes meeting his with quiet joy. "I believe we've started." Nathan stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "You mean?" "Yes," she whispered. "Our family is beginning, Nathan, our own story to be remembered." He gathered her in his arms, his heart so full he could scarcely speak. This woman who had taught him the importance of remembrance had now given him a future to look forward to, a child who would carry their names, their love, their stories. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." In the distance, the cemetery where their journey began lay peaceful in the evening light. The grave that had once been nameless now stood as a testament to Beatrice's compassion and Nathan's transformation, a reminder that even in the harshest frontier, love could take root and flourish. And in the home they had built together, Nathan and Beatrice Vance began writing the next chapter of their story, one that would be remembered, cherished, and passed down through generations to come.